March 2023, China reopened for international visitors. Although we had planned to visit Japan, we canceled our trip and rerouted straight to Kevin's childhood home, Shanghai, China. This was an opportunity for me to see the streets that he grew up in, which are right in the urban center of Shanghai on Nanjing Shilu. Kevin's family has been in Shanghai for many generations, so this was a chance for me to see where he went to school, where he played, where he ate, and learn more about his family. This is a catalog of all of that, as well as all of the fun things that we did during our time in Shanghai. My visit to Shanghai happened to fall on a national holiday called Qingmingjie, which is translated to Tomb Sweeping Day. It's a day when families go out to the cemetery to visit their past family members, grandmas and grandpas, and pay respects, clean the tomb, and leave flowers. Since I can't think of a similar holiday in America, I was surprised how full the cemetery was of so many visitors going to see their family, and how pretty the cemetery was. It felt actually more like a park or a place that one might go to have a picnic. It was so fun to see the streets where Kevin grew up and where he lived. Shanghai is one of the biggest cities in the world, and Kevin's definitely a true city boy given he grew up in the middle of the downtown. It was crazy looking out of the window and seeing all of the luxury stores and the fancy surroundings. In Shanghai, there seems to be a mall on every single block, and the interiors are always beautifully decorated. People spend a lot of time shopping to define their different fashion sense, and we were shocked to see people even lining up at the Hermes and the other luxury stores. The city itself is full of fashion too, and people love to express their fashion sense, or at least try to. The cityscape of Shanghai is super modern and full of glass skyscrapers and super tall buildings, and it gets rebuilt almost every 2 to 3 years. If you came back after a few years, you wouldn't recognize it because the pace of expansion and the speed of building is so fast in China. The modern cityscape contrasts beautifully with the more historical aspects of the architecture, such as the Bund, which is made in a French colonial style back from when the time the Bund was occupied by the French and the British. And of course, the ancient Chinese architecture, which is present all over the city in both old and new buildings and in parks. We even encountered a public matchmaking event, which is where matchmakers will bring the profiles of singles, boys and girls, to a public park and show off their various qualifications and attributes to other parents looking for pairs for their children or other singles. We had a chance to visit in the spring, so it was so sunny and the flowers are blooming everywhere. Our first day trip out of Shanghai was to Zhujiajiao Watertown, which is an ancient village about an hour away from Shanghai. And it's also known as the Venice of China because it's actually built around the water, and it's full of those canals, and you can even take a little boat around the town on the canals, similar to how it is in Venice. Obviously, it does look very different. It is all built in the ancient Chinese style because this town apparently has a history of over 1,700 years. So I think it's amazing how quickly in China you can go from such a modern, urban, populated city as Shanghai and then suddenly be transported back 1,000 years in history to such a charming place like this. I really loved the Watertown because it was full of really cute shops. It had tea shops on the water, on the canal, little small food and street food that you can try as you walk around. And it had multiple different gardens and courtyards, bonsai garden, and also the ancient houses of the previous aristocrats that lived there to explore and look at the beautiful plant arrangements and the nature in those courtyards as well. 只叹他回眸秋水悲曲，只忆他颠簸去苦多，借三两苦酒
方知离不可，只叹他相思年摇落。
心多憔悴，爱浮于东流的水，生命丰沛，抵不过天公不作美。往事回味，不过是弹指一挥，日复日望，春秋水属我与美。你爱着谁？倾吐了几道伤，我锁着眉，最是相思断人肠。老燕纷飞，寂寥最是。
On our way back from Zhujiajiao, Kevin was really kind to book me an afternoon tea because he knows I am obsessed with tea. And we got to this really cute place. It was inside of a hotel, and they gave us pastries, little sweets, sandwiches, savory things, like the whole arrangement for afternoon tea, and some fruits. And I think I drank a pu'er tea. All right, we had finished our day trip and we were back to Shanghai City. So it was time to explore the sights. One of the places we both really wanted to see was the Shanghai Aquarium. This aquarium is pretty famous in China, and although it's not the newest or most modern one thing in particular that it's very famous for is that it has the world's longest viewing tunnel. So the viewing tunnel is essentially a tunnel that you walk through, and there's fish all around you, above you, and you can see things pretty much 360 degrees, which is a really amazing immersive experience. And one thing we both really liked about this tunnel in particular was that it was spread out in multiple pieces. So it wasn't just one tunnel to see, but it was a whole kind of labyrinth of tunnels with different types of fish and sharks and turtles, and everyone had a new type of wildlife. They even had a tunnel that went across 2 floors, so you got to take an escalator down, which I thought was really cool and I had never seen before. We were really impressed with the diversity of wildlife that we saw, and it was a really fun time connecting with animals. The next really cool place we got to see was the Shanghai Natural History Museum. And this is also all about animals. Apparently, though, we visited on some sort of school field trip day, so there seemed to be 1,000 children running around everywhere. But it was really fun to see all of the different replicas of the animals they had, including extinct ones like dinosaurs and mammoths, as well as other animals that you would see in a safari. They showed all sorts of animals and showed also the history of the earth, the history of humankind, and kind of the evolution of different species over time. So a really engaging and informative place.
Super Idol 的笑容都没你的甜，8月正午的阳光都没你耀眼，热爱105度的你，滴滴青春的蒸馏水。你不知道你有多可爱，跌倒后会傻笑着再站起来。
Right now we're at the Zhujiajiao. It's a bathing house. Actually, it's a Korean bathing house, and we went there. We're wearing our little special kimonos, and I got a body scrub where they take the scrubbing cloth and they just scrub every inch of your skin raw. So I'm as smooth as a dolphin now. And what did you get?
I got a full body massage and 2 plates of fruit.
Very nice. So people hang out here and they get massages. They sit in the saunas and hot tubs. There's very nice hot tubs outside. They stay here and sleep, watch games, eat dinner, lunch, and breakfast, and do arcade activities. So all sorts of things. It's a giant, giant place. Very nice. I love this in China.
你从来都不轻言失败，对梦想的执着一直不曾更改，很安心。当你对我说不怕有我在，放着让我来，勇敢追自己的梦想，那坚定的模样。Super Idol 的笑容都没你的甜，8月正午的阳光都没你耀眼，热爱105度。
We stopped for a bite of malatang, which is one of my favorite foods. It's a creamy broth of your choice filled with pretty much any fillings that you can pick at random from this giant refrigerator that has everything in it. So it's super customized and the spices just taste so good. It's really warming and comforting type of food. And apparently, according to Wikipedia, it originated in Sichuan on the Yangtze River, where the fishermen would just throw whatever they could find into a pot of boiling water and add the local spices. So the Bund obstacle course is something I believe has actually been added fairly recently. It is essentially a 6-story obstacle course on the Bund, and it has different kind of activities. It has this giant swing that you can go on. It also has a mega slide that slides all the way from the top to the bottom. And the main activity is that you go through these little like harness supported courses, and you get higher and higher level that gets harder and scarier as you go. And so we eventually made it all the way to the top level, which was at least 60 feet off the ground. It was honestly pretty terrifying. I think on this climbing wall, I was just holding on for dear life because, you know, you only trust those harnesses so much. But it was a lot of fun, and it was funny to observe the little children who just had no fear of death at all racing through the course. This course in particular is deceivingly difficult. It's in the highest level of the park, and it's also rated as the most challenging category. All of the different pieces of the course were labeled by difficulty, and the hard thing with this one is that it's too far away so that you can't reach the next. I got pretty stressed out by the end of this, and it was funny because since it was above the street, a crowd had gathered underneath me by the time that I was late into the course and was cheering me on. So by the time here that I got off and grabbed onto the pole for my life, all of them cheered below, which I really appreciated. Finally, we get to the food section. I know this was one of the most important parts of the trip for Kevin, and certainly there are no shortage of hundreds of millions of options all around China. We're starting here with my #1 favorite food, which is called Xiaoyang Shengjianbao. It is a chain of what are called shengjianbao, which are these buns that are so juicy because they are filled with both meat and broth on the inside. So when you bite in, this just juice and broth pours out. Another big thing in China that we enjoyed was the food courts. I mentioned before that they have a lot of malls everywhere, and with every single one of those malls comes a mega food center at the bottom that has at least, 20 options in there or so of all sorts of different kinds of food. I think we had wontons, we had this Sichuan like spicy potato thing, we had sashimi, super soft and creamy fish, and then some also kind of like pork noodles here, which are really good. There's a big coffee scene in Shanghai, and so there's all sorts of little independent coffee shops with fairly high quality coffee. Coffee is actually getting quite popular with younger people there, as well as tea. So here we see this cute little version of the drink, which is inside of a bamboo. So they slice a bamboo and then they use it as a cup, and then inside they have like a tea drink, and then they have this big ice cream, green tea ice cream on top, which is super cute. So definitely check out the coffee and tea scene all around Shanghai. Next, we go to the most essential type of thing to do here, which is the Shanghai breakfast. Here we got a jianbing, which is kind of like a scallion pancake type of thing with a bunch of fillings, including like a meat sometimes and an egg. And also it must have a little crunchy wafer inside to make everything crispy. Besides all of the different casual food that we had and trying out different restaurants ourselves, we also had a chance to hang out with Kevin's family, his cousins, aunts, and uncles. So we got to check out a few nicer restaurants as well. Chinese restaurants really care quite a bit about presentation and looking fancy and nice, so we got to see these beautiful different food options here. I think this was goose liver cubes, and we had these jellied meat, so really nice presentation and more sophisticated type of flavors here, together with his aunt, uncle, and cousins. Something that Kevin and I talk a lot about is how Chinese food and Chinese restaurants aren't really well represented in America, and that here Chinese food is still mainly like a cheaper or casual thing. But actually in China, I feel that the restaurants are so fancy and so beautifully decorated. Like, you rarely see restaurants like that in USA, and if they are as nice looking, they're definitely not affordable. But in China, I feel like their average restaurant looks stunning. And they have like these private rooms that you can sit in and just have your own party to yourself, which is pretty common to just, have that private experience. Now let's wrap up the food section with our number one highlight from food from this trip, which was our chance to visit a North Korean restaurant. Now as an American, this is something I pretty much never get exposed to, so it's really interesting to learn about the restaurant and the people that work there. And how we found this was that the spa that we had gone to was actually a North Korean spa. And so Kevin's cousin introduced us to this restaurant. And the workers there are part of an exchange program where they're selected to come to China for 3 years and work at establishments such as the North Korean restaurant and the spa, so forth. The food there was pretty similar to South Korean, with some Chinese aspects and some extra seafood, but what really stood out was the performers and how they played pretty much every single instrument and how well they sang. It's time for our last highlight of our 2023 Shanghai trip, which is our visit to TeamLab Borderless, an immersive visual light experience which is in Tokyo and in Shanghai. Here, see for yourself.